Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you once again for being with us in these weekly videos about the Gita for Everyone program. Today we're starting the analysis of Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the beginning of the second section of the Bhagavad Gita. Second section contains Chapter 7 till Chapter 12. As we mentioned in the summary of the Gita, in the video that took around 30 minutes to complete the whole 18 chapters, we refer to the fact that the middle section of the Bhagavad Gita talks about Krishna. The first section talks about us and what we need to know, what we need to understand, what we need to do in order to achieve perfection. But that perfection is related with connecting ourselves with Krishna. That's what the second section is all about. Chapter 7 to 12, you can see the chapter titles refers to Krishna, the Supreme, the Absolute, devotional service to whom, the forms, the universal form of whom, everything is about Krishna. So we will start the analysis of this referring to the previous chapter, just for us to be in sequence of what we are analyzing. At the end of the last chapter, chapter 6, Krishna says, basically, think of me. The highest yogi is that one who thinks of me. So in this chapter, Prabhupada explains in one of the purports, this chapter Krishna will teach us how to be fully Krishna conscious. So that is the idea. So let's start with the title. First of all, the title is knowledge of the Absolute. So I'm just going to write this word here because it's quite important that we understand what does it mean. What does it mean? The Absolute. Srila Prabhupada often used this word absolute or the absolute truth. Sometimes he will use the Latin word summum bonum, which means everything good. So first of all, because you see one of the purpose of this analysis or this study, this Gita for Everyone, is that we remember. We remember what we study, what we analyze, what we read. So we need to remember these chapters. Chapter 7, it's called the knowledge of the Absolute. Why? Because Srila Prabhupada explains in the first 3 lines of his introduction to the Srimad Bhagavatam the difference between God and the absolute truth. And just to make it sure, actually you can go and read those 3 lines, but to make it sure, the difference is that God is a controller, but the absolute truth is the combination of the controller and his energies. And that's exactly what Krishna will explain in this chapter. Now, before we enter into the analysis of the chapter, I want to give you an example or remind you of the example that we use for the second section. The example is a job interview. And I will explain why do we use this analogy. Because Krishna in chapter 3, text number 9, he is offering us a job. He says, work for me. Jagyartha karmano nyatram. If you work for me, you will be free. Right? Basically, that's what he's saying. You will obtain so many things. He has been describing all the benefits. In the last 2 chapters of the first section, chapter 5 and 6, we find so many benefits of becoming a yogi for Krishna, a worker for Krishna, a devotee of Krishna. So this is the example for the whole section, chapter 7 till 12, a job interview. Here I am wanting that job. There it is, Krishna interviewing me and presenting himself. That's what's going to happen in this middle section. As I said, the title, the absolute knowledge of the Absolute. The definition of Absolute is that one who has everything and controls everything. And that's exactly the point of this chapter. And the topic will be, who is the boss? I'm just using this word because it's quite common. We all had some boss at some point. In working or studying, a superior, etc. So who is the boss? That's the answer, that's the question that will be presented here. That's the answer that Krishna will give. In fact, just to mention something particular about this chapter, in this chapter we find no questions by Arjuna. But there is an underlying question. Who's the boss of everything? Who's the owner of everything? And just to fast forward the video, the explanation of the analysis, in fact, we find this answer by Krishna in the last verse of this chapter. This chapter has 30 verses, and it begins by Krishna explaining to Arjuna that now you will listen to something that after hearing this, you don't need to know anything else. I will explain the material, he says, and I will explain the spiritual. So after this, you are complete in terms of knowledge. So that's how the chapter begins. Krishna elaborating on different things, what he is, who likes him, how he can be seen in nature. There are 3 chapters that explain this same knowledge. Chapter 7, 9, and 10. Many descriptions Krishna gives us of how can we see him. In the moon, in the sky, in the earth, in the aroma, in the rain. In so many ways we can see Krishna in nature. So this is the beginning. Krishna talking about himself. It's like the boss enters into the office and he says, this is who I am. This is what I have. This is what I like. This is what I dislike. Krishna starts presenting himself. The ending of this chapter is very interesting. And as I often said, one verse. If you don't have time to read all the verses, at least I invite you to read one verse. And that is the last one, text 30. Why? Because in that verse, Krishna will explain why he's called boss, or as we say, God, or the controller. But particularly the absolute, because he's the controller of all his energies. And that's exactly how he starts this chapter, explaining his 2 main energies, spiritual energy and material energy. So in this verse, text 30, he explains that he is the owner of everything, Adibhuta. He is the controller of everything, Adidhaiva. And he is the enjoyer of everything, Adijagya. These are the main 3 reasons. If somebody asks us, why do you say that Krishna is God? We can refer to that verse. Text 30, chapter 7. This is the reason why Krishna is considered the absolute. Krishna is establishing here who is the boss, who is supreme. Now the topic is exactly that, the supremacy of Krishna. The different sections, here Krishna explains his personality. He talks about how he interacts with us in the form of super soul. Many different aspects of his being are explained in this particular chapter. As I said, just a reminder, no questions by Arjuna, and everything is basically a big long answer of Krishna to the underlying question or doubt. In chapter 4, he recommends that we have to destroy doubt. In chapter 3, he recommends that we have to destroy lust. So Krishna has that very special way of answering things that may not be clearly explained in previous chapters, and he takes a whole section or a whole chapter to explain that. So the doubt, the main philosophical doubt is, where do we come from? Who's the boss? Who's the owner? Who is the source? What is the source? So all that is in a very compacted way presented or explained here in this particular chapter. The connection with the previous chapter, as I mentioned earlier, is because here Krishna will explain to us how can we think of him, right? He says the highest yogi, the most exalted yogi is the one who thinks of me. Now he will explain how we can think of Krishna. The connection with the next chapter is that at the end, he says, those who understand me as the boss, just to summarize it, can achieve me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. We find that in the last line of the last verse of this chapter. So Krishna, in the next chapter, chapter 8, he will discuss about the topic of death. How a devotee who dies in Krishna consciousness goes to connect again or reunite again himself with Krishna. In the personal way, is a very important chapter. Why? Because Prabhupada says, this is the foundation of our faith. If we understand this chapter, we can engage in devotional service. If we don't have faith that Krishna is the Supreme, Krishna is the Lord of everything, then our service or our attempt to engage in devotional service will be very fickle, will not be strong. So this is the purpose of this chapter, to solidify our strength in terms of our faith to Krishna, to explain to us first of all, who's the boss, who's the owner and controller and enjoyer of everything. And in that way, we can, at some point, be able to strongly fixed as the yogi in a windless place, as the lamp in the windless place can focus his mind or her mind in Krishna. So thank you very much. We hope this is useful for your understanding about the Bhagavad Gita as it is presented by Srila Prabhupada. All glories to him.